The Trumpet Daily from Jerusalem.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. Last week, the Democratic Party in America was bombarded with criticism for removing God from its party platform and for its failure to mention Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, in the case of Israel, which has controlled all of Jerusalem for 45 years, if Israel did pull back to the 1949 armistice lines, it would still retain control of the west side of the city, which is where all of its government institutions are located: the Knesset, the Supreme Court, its government ministries, the Prime Minister's residence. And yet, the current government of the United States won't even go so far as to acknowledge West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Notice this exchange between a reporter and a State Department official from earlier this year.
Yesterday there was a bit of a kerfuffle over an announcement that was made by the department about the travel of your boss. Is it the State Department's position that Jerusalem is not part of Israel?
Well, you know that our position on Jerusalem has not changed. The first media note was issued in error without appropriate clearances. We reissued the note to make clear that Acting Undersecretary for Kathy Stevens will be traveling to Algiers, Doha, Amman, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. With regard to our Jerusalem policy, it's a permanent status issue. It's got to be resolved through the negotiations between the parties. Is
it the view of the United States that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, notwithstanding the question about the embassy, the location of the U.S. embassy?
We are not going to prejudge the outcome of those negotiations, including the final status of Jerusalem.
Does that mean that you do not regard Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Jerusalem is a permanent status issue. It's got to be resolved through negotiations.
That seems to suggest that you do not regard Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Is that correct?
I have just spoken to this issue, and I have nothing further to say on it. Yeah.
Ask the question, and I think there's a lot of people out there who are interested in hearing a real answer and not trying to duck and say that this has got to be resolved by negotiations between the two sides. What is the capital of Israel?
Our policy with regard to Jerusalem is it has to be solved through negotiations. That's all I have to say on this issue.
What is the capital of Israel?
Our embassy, as you know, is located in Tel Aviv.
So does that mean that you regard Tel Aviv as the capital of Israel?
The issue on Jerusalem has to be settled through negotiations. Lalit, thank you.
Subject.
Is it your position that all of Jerusalem is a final status issue, or do you think that, or is it just East Jerusalem?
Matt, I don't have anything further to what I've said 17 times on that subject. Okay.
All right, so hold on. So I just want to make sure you're saying that all of Jerusalem, not just East Jerusalem, is a final status issue.
Matt, I don't have anything further on Jerusalem to what I've already said.
Now, more recently, the White House press secretary also refused to answer a reporter's question about the capital of Israel. Take a look at this video.
Is this administration considered to be the capital of Israel, Jerusalem or Tel Aviv?
I haven't had that question in a while. Our position has not changed, Connie. Can we...
What's the capital?
You know our position.
I don't.
Chris,
I really
No, she doesn't know. She doesn't know. That's why she asked.
She does know.
I don't.
She does not know. She just said she doesn't know. I don't know.
Have long... Come on, that's what I call on Christy. Go ahead. That conversation.
Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
You know the answer.
We don't know the answer. We don't know the answer. Could you just give us an answer? What do you recognize? What does you recognize?
Our position hasn't changed, Lester. Go ahead.
Position.
Two questions. One.
Now, there are plenty of international bodies and news agencies that are quite happy to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. The BBC even declares East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine right now. Yet the United States can't even acknowledge publicly that the west side of this city behind me is Israel's capital. Now, of course, when it comes to the politically expedient thing to do, politicians will often embrace Israel for a campaign season in order to win votes. Back in 2008, for example, then Senator Barack Obama, without hesitation, declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. Notice this.
Now, let me be clear. Israel's security is sacrosanct. It is non-negotiable. The Palestinians need a state. The Palestinians need a state that is contiguous and cohesive, and that allows them to prosper. But any agreement with the Palestinian people must preserve Israel's identity as a Jewish state with secure, recognized, defensible borders. And Jerusalem will remain the capital of Israel, and it must remain undivided.
So in viewing those videos, you can understand why the Democrats were hammered the way that they were last week. You can see why the Democratic National Committee reinstated God and Jerusalem into the party platform on Wednesday of last week. But as you've probably seen already, reinstating God and Israel didn't exactly end the controversy. Notice what happened.
Mr. Chairman, I have submitted my amendment in writing, and I believe it is being projected on the screen for the delegates to see. I move adoption of the amendment as submitted and shown to the delegates.
A motion has been made. Is there a second? Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the matter requires a two-thirds vote in the affirmative. All those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. In the opinion of the... Let me do that again. All of those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. I guess.
And then you've got to let them do what they're going to do.
I'll do that one more time. All those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds have voted in the affirmative. The motion is adopted, and the platform has been amended as shown on the screen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So in the lead up to the convention, for the first time in 40 years, the Democrats neglected to place Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And then at the convention, many Democrats were seen on national television booing the committee's attempt to reinstate the clauses about God and Jerusalem. It wasn't exactly the Democrats' finest hour. Now, there were other changes to the party platform that didn't receive widespread coverage and that weren't changed back. For example, the document didn't refer to Israel as America's strongest ally in the Middle East, as platforms in the past have done. The 2012 platform didn't call on the international community to continue shunning Hamas, the terrorist organization in Gaza. And this year's platform did not mention that the United States opposed the Palestinian demand for the so-called right of return, which would virtually destroy Israel, just looking at it demographically. Now, over the past week, as you would expect, the Republicans have been patting themselves on the back as the real supporters of Israel. But if you compare this year's Republican platform with the one produced in 2008, you can also find significant changes, significant differences over just 4 years ago. This year's platform, for example, referred to Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but it removed the adjective undivided when referring to it as the capital of Israel, leaving the way open, opening the door just slightly for the division of this city, which many people, of course, support. The Republicans also removed a sentence supporting the relocation of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, another significant change. Now, the Republican changes overall, they aren't quite as dramatic as that filtered their way into the Democratic platform, but still, how do you explain this movement, this trend that we see happening, worsening, increasing every single year, every single election cycle? But still, how do you explain all of this hostility toward Israel, how do you explain this increasing isolation of Israel? And in the case of the Democrats, how do you justify the removal of God from your party's platform? Now, God was only mentioned once in the 2008 platform, so back then he was barely hanging by a thread. And then this year, the authors of that platform didn't even want him mentioned one time. I think President Obama was mentioned in about 140 cases in the party's platform, but God not even once. Where is this godless, anti-Israel spirit coming from? Well, if you've been watching the Key of David or here the Trumpet Daily or following the Trumpet.com, you know where this spirit comes from. It comes straight from the devil. Satan has an intense hatred for all of mankind, not just Jews, but all of mankind. But he does have a special hatred for the biblical nation of Judah. And that hatred is spreading like a disease over all the world. I mean, if this is what the government in the United States of America, Israel's strongest ally traditionally, if this is what's coming from America's government, well, it's easy to see why this anti-Semitic spirit is just spreading over all the earth in many different forms of violence and hatred. This kind of hostility, this resentment, it's a contagion that Satan is using to direct a great many people in the world today. You see so much hatred, so much racial strife and division, and such a godless spirit in so many sectors of society, not just one Democratic Party or not just one institution. It's all over the world. As soon as the Bible is introduced or as soon as God is brought into the equation, people just tune him out. And there's a reason why they do this. God says in Romans 8:7 that the carnal mind is enmity against God. That's in the King James Version. You can look at the Revised Standard or other translations that translate that word enmity as hostility or hostile. The carnal mind of man, in other words, is hostile toward God. This verse goes on to say, for it's not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. Now you put that together with Jeremiah 17:9, where it talks about the wicked and deceitful heart of man. How do you explain this? Yet there's so many people today, even religious people, who believe somehow that the God who created the universe is the God who rules this world, and he certainly is not the God ruling this world. It's another God, talked about in 2 Corinthians 4, Revelation 12:9, the God who's deceived the entire world. Now, the mind of man is just naturally hostile toward God, his law, his purpose for man. And it's hostile in so many ways, in so many areas, in so many nations, in so many governments. It's hostile toward this little nation of Judah, toward this modern nation called Israel today. Now, God is no respecter of persons, the scriptures tell us. He doesn't view Israel as a people better than other people on earth. But if you look into the Bible, you see that that book is primarily a book about Israel, the ancient nation, and then, of course, the spiritual nation of Israel today, which is the church. That's in Galatians 6. From the beginning, if you look at the Bible, God called Israel out of this world to be a model nation, a job that it failed to do, by the way. It became a miserable failure and went into captivity. Of course, before that, it divided into two nations, Israel and Judah. Both of them then went into captivity. And today, as I mentioned just a bit ago, God has chosen his church to fulfill this same role of coming out of this world. The church today, which is comprised of members of every race from all over the world, the church today is defined in the Bible as spiritual Israel, the Israel of God, as Paul said. Now, this is the true, yet astonishing reason behind all of this animosity that we see aimed at God and aimed at Israel today. The devil hates God. He hates the church of God. He hates the little nation called Israel today. Satan absolutely hates God's plan and will do anything that he can to pervert it and to destroy it. In 1 Thessalonians 3, this is verse 5, it says, "For this cause," this is Paul writing to the brethren in Thessalonica, "For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain." Now, Paul was probably in Corinth at the time that he wrote this letter, and he had sent Timothy, his assistant, the evangelist Timothy, to Thessalonica, because as it says there in that verse, he wanted to know where the brethren stood spiritually. He wanted to know their faith, as that verse says, lest by some means the tempter would lead them astray. That tempter, of course, is Satan the devil. Now, Satan will use any means necessary to turn people away from God and His purpose for man, to turn people away from God's truth, to turn people away from the Bible. Paul also said in 2 Corinthians 11 in verse 3, "But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." Now today, Satan is using any means necessary to twist, to distort, and pervert God's truth. This is the real reason why we see so much hatred aimed at God, aimed at the Bible, aimed at God's church, aimed at Jews, aimed at fathers. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. The more you understand and know about God's purpose and the fact that He's reproducing Himself through family and the fact that He's a father heading up that family, you can see why Satan keys in on these various targets. Fathers, the Jews, God's truth, the Bible, God Himself. Now, if Satan is going after that with such venomous hatred, how much of a motivation will that be for you to make sure you go after God's truth, to make sure you wrap your arms, spiritually speaking, around the God family vision? Now, if you'd like to study further into specifically this intense hatred for the Jews that we just see increasing around the world, make sure you review chapter 8 of the booklet, The Key of David, and we'll send you a free copy of that upon request. But added to that, make sure you also request a copy of Herbert W. Armstrong's book, Mystery of the Ages, and let God open your mind to the awesome purpose for man, the awesome purpose that He's working out right now on this earth. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time.